Let's start with that Paris deal going into effect here earlier than many expected. What's the signal, or what are the signals that sends to investors, particularly in the energy and alternative energy space?
Well, right now we're looking at it's a big day for climate change, because with that deal going into effect today, that sort of sends a signal to the world on a couple tracks. One is that we're going to decarbonize the world by about mid-century, which is a pledge, a very broad pledge in the agreement, and also that we'll hold global temperatures from increasing more than 2 degrees centigrade or Celsius. So that sends a signal to renewable energy investors that that's sort of the course that the world is setting itself out upon. One thing that we'll be really looking for in Morocco next week, when these talks sort of resume, is the interesting timing of this, really, with the U.S. election. And what we'll be listening for is there going to be a big sigh of relief for negotiators from the nearly 200 countries when they get together, because they'll be watching the U.S. elections, and they've heard a lot of things from Donald Trump about really undercutting a lot of what was done in Paris.
He's certainly talking about it some on the campaign trail, has infamously described climate change as a hoax perpetuated by the Chinese. Would he be able to pull out of this deal easily? What would the options be for a President Trump when it comes to climate change? How much the U.S. has allocated to fight climate change?
Well, it's interesting. If you recall, President George Bush withdrew the U.S. from Kyoto about 15 years ago. And what a lot of the negotiators and investors in the renewable energy sector say is we're kind of in a different world. It would be a little more difficult for a U.S. president to do that today, mostly because we have these intertwined domestic relationships with China and India, other big players in energy, and also in defense, really, for a broad array of connections. So those relationships are interwoven. So I think what the prediction at this point is, even if Trump wins, it will be far more difficult for him to simply walk away or pull the rug out from underneath the Paris deal.
Dean, we were talking to Paul Krugman yesterday, and he said a great disappointment was the degree to which this was being talked about on the campaign trail, but they aren't talking about as much as he'd like. What have we heard from Hillary Clinton in terms of what her plan would be here? We've talked about the continuation of the status quo of President Obama's economic policies. How about the climate change policies?
So Hillary Clinton's campaign has been, I think, missed a lot by reporters in terms of really playing it up. As you know, that climate change hasn't been a big part of either the debates or this campaign. She does have a platform, though, and that has to do with really sort of extending a lot of what President Obama has done on climate, his climate agenda. She's actually called for a 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, a few percentage points beyond what Obama has pledged roughly 10 years from now. All right.